The morning train had come and gone, and Nora still stood on the Larkspur platform, her trunk against her knee, the whole town watching. She had worn her good cobalt dress and pinned her auburn hair the careful way a bride pins it. The letters had promised a man named Harlan a house, a stove of her own. No one crossed to meet her. An hour passed. The station master would not raise his eyes the second time, and two women by the mercantile murmured behind their hands. Nora understood, plain as weather, that by supper the whole valley would know a bride had come and been left standing on the boards. She had $4 sewn into her hem, a cook's 2 hands, and no fare back the road she had come. Farther down the platform, a freighter had watched it all, his 6 mules dozing at a half-loaded wagon. He set down a crate, wiped his palms on a rag, and crossed to her, his hat coming off his head as he came. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Amos. The room is yours. I've a house at the north end of town with a sound stove and a door that bolts from the inside, and it's yours for as long as you need to sort what comes next. I'll take the barn, and I won't ask you for a single thing." She did not answer straight off. Things had been handed to her before, always with a string tied to them. "Why," she said at last, "would a man give his house to a woman he has never once laid eyes on?" "I'm not giving you my house." He nearly smiled. "I'm giving you a door that bolts and a week to think behind it. The barn is dry, and I have slept in far worse beds than my own hay. Settle the account, however, sits right with you, or settle it in nothing at all. That part is yours to decide, and none of it is mine." The two women on the porch had gone quiet to listen. Nora felt the whole street waiting to see whether she would take the offer and prove them right about her or refuse it and stand on the boards until Thursday. She thought of the $4 in her hem and of the frost the valley nights still carried this early in the spring of 1884. "I don't take charity," she said. "Good. I'm not offering any. I run a freight business, not a mission." He nodded up the north road toward the town. "There's a cold stove in that house that hasn't seen a proper hand since my mother passed. Earn the room if you'd rather. But the door bolts from your side no matter what you decide." So she went. She let him carry the trunk, and she walked the north road beside him with the whole town watching. And she told herself she was only cold, only practical, only a cook between one kitchen and the next. The house was smaller than the letters had made her imagined house, and truer. There was the stove he had named, and a table scarred by years of use, and a shelf of tin and crockery a careful woman had once arranged, and no one had rearranged since. The room he gave her had a narrow bed, a window that faced the mountains, and a bolt, exactly as he had promised. Amos set the trunk down inside the door, touched his hat, and went out to the barn without crossing the threshold again. That first night she lay listening for his step at her door, as a woman learns to listen. It never came. In the morning she found he had left kindlings split by the stove and a fresh pail of water on the step, and had gone up the valley with his wagon before the light. She meant to stay a week. That was the bargain she made with her pride. The stove taught her the truth of him before he ever said another word. It was a good stove, kept clean, but the flour in the bin had gone weevily and the coffee was old, because a man who freights is a man who is gone. She threw out the ruined flour, and with the last of her own coin, she bought good flour and a crock of molasses at the mercantile, where the widow who kept the counter, a sharp-eyed woman named Bess, weighed out the goods and the situation together. "You're the one," Bess said. "The bride nobody claimed." "I'm the cook staying in the north house," Nora said, level. "A pound of your saleratus, please, and your dried apples if they aren't as old as your flour." Bess's mouth twitched, and something in it was almost respect. "Amos Rourke is a decent man," she said, sliding the apples across. "Decent men in this town are watched close, on account of their rare. You mind how it looks." "I mind how it tastes," Nora said, and took her parcel and went. That evening, she set a sourdough sponge to working, the starter she had carried west in a sealed crock through 3 changes of train, kept alive on flour and patience since the boarding house days. By the time Amos came down from the valley, gray with road dust and swaying on his feet, there was hot bread on the table and a stew that had used the tough end of a cheap cut, as a thrifty cook uses everything. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the table, as though it were a thing he did not quite trust. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know I didn't." She set out a second plate. "Sit down before it's cold. You look like a man who's been eating hardtack off a wagon seat for a week." "2 weeks," he admitted and sat. They ate without much talk that first night, but there is a kind of talk that food does on its own. He noticed she watched his hands, the cracks in them, the split knuckle he had bound with a rag. When he had finished, he pushed the plate back an inch and said plainly, as he seemed to say everything, "That is the best supper I've had under this roof in 4 years. I want you to know I meant what I said on the platform. Nothing changes because there's bread on the table." "I know it doesn't," she said, and to her own surprise, she did know it. A week became a habit before either of them named it a home. She learned the shape of his work by feeding the men who did it. Amos ran 2 wagons and hired a young teamster named Gill to drive the second, and the men came through the yard at all hours, and a cook who could put a hot meal in front of a tired driver was, she found, worth more to a freight outfit than another mule in the span. Gill, who was 19 and ate like a threshing crew, taught her the trade between mouthfuls. "A mule team's faster than the bull trains," he told her, forking up stew, "but it's dearer to feed. Boss hauls light freight, high value. The stuff a camp will pay top coin to get quick. Powder, tools, good flour, mail. The oxmen take the heavy, slow loads and don't fret if it's a month on the road." He mopped his plate. "Boss charges $1.50 the hundredweight up to the ruby diggings. Some outfits charge $2. He won't. Says a fair rate keeps a customer longer than a fat one." "And does it?" Nora asked. "It keeps the customer," Gill allowed. "I ain't so sure it keeps the outfit." She baked ahead. She learned that bread baked hard-crusted, cooled completely, wrapped in clean linen and packed close, would ride 3 days up a mountain road and come off the wagon sound, and she began sending loaves up the valley in the wagons, to the diggings that had not tasted risen bread in a season. A miner who has eaten good bread on a cold ridge remembers the hand that sent it. Word came back down the road with the empty wagons, and the word was worth more than the coin. She mended, too, in the evenings, because a cook's hands do not rest, and because torn harness and split seams were another thing this house had let go for want of a woman's hour. She patched Gill's coat and restitched a girth that would have broken on the grade and cost a wagon. Amos watched her work one night by the lamp and spoke careful, as a man stepping onto river ice. "You didn't hire on to darn my driver's elbows," he said. "I didn't hire on at all," she answered, not lifting her eyes from the needle. "I'm a boarder earning her room. A boarder mends what she sees fraying." "Is that still the whole of what you are?" "A boarder." She let the question sit and set another stitch and did not answer it, because the true answer had grown too large for the plain word she would have used in April, and she was not ready yet to say the new one out loud. He did not press. He never did. But she noticed he left the lamp trimmed higher after that, so her needle would have the better light, and she thought that a man who says nothing and trims the lamp has said a good deal. It was the account book that changed things, though. One rain-locked afternoon, with the wagons idled in the yard and Amos mending harness by the stove, Nora dried her hands and asked, plainly, to see how the business stood, because a cook learns fast that a kitchen is only as safe as the ledger behind it. He hesitated, then gave it over. She read it as she read a recipe, front to back, and what she found troubled her. "You're hauling at the same rate as 3 years past," she said. "But your feed's gone up, and your harness, and this railroad you keep naming. What happens to a wagon freighter when the rails finally reach the camps?" Amos set down the harness. "He hauls the last stretch the rails can't manage," he said, "for a while. Then the spur line comes and he doesn't. How long is a while? A year, maybe less." He said it without drama, a man who had already done the arithmetic and made his peace with it. "They surveyed the branch to the Ruby diggings last fall. When it's laid, my long haul is gone. I'll have the short pull off the depot and not much else." "Then you're not selling hauling," Nora said. "You're selling the thing. Hauling gets people. You're selling supper on a mountain where there isn't any. The camps don't want a wagon. They want flour that's already bred by the time it arrives, and coffee that's fresh ground, and the one warm meal a week a working man will pay real money for." She tapped the ledger. "A road ranch, a provisioning house. You've been carrying the profit right past your own door for 3 years, and charging $1.50 to do it." He was quiet a long moment. "That's my mother's stove you're standing at," he said finally. "And you've done more thinking about my living in one rainy afternoon than I've let myself do in a 12-month. Why?" "Because I earned my room," she said. "That was the bargain." But it was not only the bargain, and they both knew it now. And neither of them said so, because saying so felt like pressing. And pressing was the one thing this house had never done to her. They built it slow through the thaw and into the summer. Amos put shelves along the north wall of the barn he had slept in, and it stopped being a barn and started being a store. He hauled up flour and salt and powder and nails, and Nora turned the front room of the house into a bakery that ran before dawn, and the two trades braided together into one. One evening, when the first real coin had come in, Amos opened a fresh page at the back of the account book and headed it in his blunt hand. "Your wages first," he said, "then feed, freight, and every other cost. I'll not have you working a business you draw nothing from." "And I draw them in my own name," Nora said, "in no other." He turned the book to her. "Write the figure yourself. It's yours before it's the outfit's." She wrote it, and it was a small sum on the wide page, and it was the first money in her life that no one could name a gift. She kept that page current in her own hand every week after, and the number in it grew. Bess at the mercantile, who might have made an enemy of a rival, instead struck a fair bargain, because Bess was a widow who had kept a business alive alone and knew the sound of another woman doing the same. She sold Nora's bread in town and took an honest cut, and told the two porch women plainly to find something kinder to do with their afternoons. It was midsummer when the trouble came that showed the town who they both were. The foreman of the Ruby diggings rode down in a temper, hunted Amos out of the store yard, and accused him in a carrying voice of shorting the last powder haul by 2 full kegs. A camp that thinks it has been cheated on its powder is a camp that will take its trade elsewhere, and say why up and down the valley. Men drifted over from the smithy to watch. Amos took off his hat and stood square. "I don't short a load," he said. "Not 2 kegs, not 2 ounces. Whatever's missing, we'll find where it went." "Easy said," the foreman spat. "Your word against a light delivery. I've a camp of 40 men without powder to show for coin already paid." Nora came out of the bakery with flour to the wrist, and the store ledger tucked against her side. "Every keg that leaves this yard is weighed and written before it's loaded," she said. "In this book, in my hand, with the driver's mark beside it, before the clerk and these men here. Let's read what left and count what you signed for at the top of the grade." She set the ledger on a barrel and opened it. 12 kegs loaded the 3rd of the month. Gill's mark. Your own tally at the digging signed for 10, because 2 came off at the Halloran Ranch on your own written order. Set down here, initialed there. The powder isn't short. Your bookkeeping is. The foreman looked at his own initials a long moment. The men from the smithy chuckled low, and the sound decided it. "I'll see about that," the foreman muttered. But the heat was gone out of him, and he rode back up the grade, having learned that the freight outfit down at Larkspur kept a cleaner book than his own camp. After that, the Ruby diggings did not take its trade elsewhere. It doubled it because a camp of 40 men would rather deal with a house that can prove itself honest to the ounce. By high summer, the numbers had turned all the way over. In the spring, the long haul had cleared perhaps $30 in a good week, and less in a wet one. Now the bread, the camp suppers, and the standing provisions together brought as much before the wagons rolled at all. The boarding house took 24 loaves a day at 5 cents the loaf and counted itself fortunate to get them. The Ruby diggings signed a standing order for flour, coffee, powder, and 40 sound loaves a week, carried up on the same wagons that had once run half empty on the down leg. Then came the small, steady coin of a store where a rancher's wife could buy thread and molasses and hear the news, and the odd dollar of a stranger who had heard, 3 ranges over, that there was a place at the top of the valley where the bread was risen, and the ledger ran honest. In 1 week near the end of July, the house cleared better than $60, more than the wagons had earned in the whole muddy month of April. Nora wrote the figure in her clean hand and turned the book so Amos could read it. "That is not a freighter's week," she said. "That is a provisioner's. You've built the one thing the railroad can never haul away from you." "We built it," he said again, but this time he was looking at the figure and then at her. And the correction had stopped being about the ledger. The surveyor's stakes reached the mouth of the valley, and the thing Amos had made his grim peace with had stopped being a grief and started being a plan. He said so one evening on the step, the 2 of them watching the light go off the mountains. "When the spur comes," he said, "it'll bring the camps closer, not further. More men, more suppers. You saw it before I did." "I saw a ledger," Nora said. "You built the road that made the ledger worth reading." "We built it," he said, and left the rest unsaid, because the rest was the one account still open between them, and he would not press it. She was grateful for that, and she was, for the first time, a little sorry for it too. Then on a bright Tuesday near the end of August, the eastbound came in, and Harlan came off it. She knew him before he spoke, though she had never seen his face, only his handwriting. He came up the platform in a town coat gone shiny at the elbows, a man who wore prosperity like a borrowed hat, and he found her at the depot where she had come to take delivery of a barrel of dried fruit for the store. He looked at the cobalt dress and at the store ledger under her arm, and he smiled as though he had found a thing that belonged to him left out in a yard. "Nora," he said, "you waited. I knew a sensible girl would wait." "I didn't wait," she said. "The train I came on left months ago." "Where were you when it came in?" "Detained." He waved a hand. "A man has business. There was a claim down at Butte wanted seeing to. I sent for you. I paid your passage out of my own pocket, and I've come to collect what I paid for." He said it easily, loud, before the freight clerk and the 2 teamsters and old Bess. who had come out onto her porch to watch. "You're mine on paper, girl. I've the letters to prove I sent for you and the receipt to prove I paid your way." The word landed on the platform like a dropped crate. Nora felt the old cold come up her spine, the platform cold from the day she'd arrived, the feeling of being a thing that had been paid for. And she saw, from the corner of her eye, Amos come out of the store with an empty crate on his shoulder and stop and set it down. He did not run at Harlan. He did not raise a hand. He walked over the same unhurried way he had first walked to her, and he stood a decent pace off and he took off his hat, because that was the man he was even now. "There is no such paper," Amos said, level, "and every man here knows it." He turned, not to Nora, but to the freight clerk who kept the company's book at that depot. "You read receipts for a living. Does a paid fare buy a man a wife?" The clerk took the receipt Harlan had slapped down and read it out. $42.60, passage and fare, all told, he said, and then he set it flat on the counter. "It proves you bought a ticket, mister. It gives you no claim on the woman who wrote it. She's no more yours than the seat she sat in." Harlan's easy face began to harden. "She was sent for," he said. "A debt's a debt. Then let it be paid, and let it be finished." Nora stepped forward with the store ledger still under her arm, and she opened it to the page that was hers, and she counted the coin out slow onto the barrel where the whole street could see it was her own. "There is every cent you spent to bring me west, Harlan, back in your hand, out of wages I earned with these two hands and drew in my own name. I don't owe you myself. I never did. And now I don't owe you $1 either. So you can never stand in a street and tell this valley you bought my start. I'm not a barrel of dried fruit. You cannot collect me." Harlan looked at the coin and did not touch it. "You'll not shame me on a public platform," he said, and reached for her arm. He didn't reach it. Amos had moved at last, and it was not a blow. It was only his hand closed around Harlan's wrist, and his voice, still level, still low, but no longer soft. "She has paid you back in front of the clerk and the whole town," Amos said. "There's no debt, no paper, and no claim. You'll take your money and your receipt in the 4 o'clock train, and you'll not put a hand on her again in my sight or out of it." He let go and stepped back and put a full, clear pace between himself and her, so that no one watching could say she had traded one owner for another. "The rest is hers to decide. It was always hers." The platform was very quiet. Bess, on her porch, said, loud enough to carry, "You heard the man." And the two teamsters shifted their weight, and Harlan understood the arithmetic of a town that had made up its mind. He gathered his coin off the barrel and his receipt, and what dignity a shiny elbowed coat allows, and he stood a moment longer, looking at Nora as though she were a sum that had failed to come out. "You choose a mule driver's barn," he said, "over a house of your own." And Nora, who had stood on these same boards in April and kept her chin level because level was all she had, felt something in her go still and certain and warm. "He never once asked me to," she said. "That's the whole of it, Harlan. He gave me a door that bolted from my side and never tried the latch. He took the barn and asked me for nothing, not my thanks, not my keeping, not my name. A man who asks nothing is the only kind worth giving something to." She turned from the groom she had crossed a country to marry, and she looked at the freighter across his careful pace of daylight, and she said it before the whole watching valley, plainly, because plainly was how the man had taught her that true things get said. "I'll take the barn too, then, if you'll have a partner in it and not a keeper. I'd sooner build a house with a man than be kept in one." Amos, who had a plain word for every hard moment of his life, seemed for once to have none. He closed the clear pace between them, Slow, and he did not take her hand as though claiming it. He held it out, open as a man holds out a hand to help another up onto a wagon seat, an equal reaching for an equal. "Partner, then," he said. "Half of everything, and the book's in your hand. But I'll want to say the other part, where it isn't a business matter." He glanced at the grinning town and lowered his voice for her alone. "Not on a platform, at our own table, over your bread, where I can ask you proper and you can bolt the door on me if the answer's no." "The answer isn't no," Nora said, "but I'll let you ask it right at home." The 4 o'clock train took Harlan east and did not bring him back. The spur line reached the mouth of the valley by the first snow, exactly as the surveyor's stakes had promised, and it did not ruin Amos Rourke because Amos Rourke was no longer only a freighter. He was half of a provisioning house at the north end of Larkspur, and the other half kept the books and set the bread to rise and had, at her own table and in her own time, said yes to a plain question asked with no debt hung upon it. He asked it at their own table, over her bread, with the door standing unbolted behind her because she had chosen to leave it so. She said yes in her own words and in her own hour, and neither of them ever once called it a rescue, because from the platform onward it had never been one. They married in the fall, quietly, with Bess standing up beside Nora and Gil holding the mules. The barn kept its old name even after it became a store, because they had both learned to honor the plain fact of a thing. And on delivery mornings, Nora still walked down to the depot to take the freight off the train, standing on the same warm boards where a town had once watched a bride go unclaimed. Only now she was not waiting to be met. She was there to receive what the rails brought, to check it against her own honest ledger, and to carry it home to the house and the barn, and the man who had, from the first, only ever handed her a door and let her decide whether to walk through it. If a quiet story of frontier decency stays with you, consider following the Calico Promise, where a plain offer of shelter, warmth, or a hot meal reveals a person's whole character. And tell me, before you go, had you stood on those April boards with $4 in your hem and a town watching, would you have taken the room and trusted the barn, or held your ground until Thursday and trusted no one at all?